The Southern Pacific Transportation Company, earlier Southern Pacific Railroad and Southern Pacific Company, and usually called the Southern Pacific or Espee, was an American Class I railroad. It was absorbed in 1988 by the company that controlled the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad and 8 years later became part of the Union Pacific Railroad. The railroad was founded as a landholding company in 1865, later acquiring the Central Pacific Railroad by lease. By 1900, the Southern Pacific Company was a major railroad system incorporating many smaller companies, such as the Texas and New Orleans Railroad and Morgan's Louisiana and Texas Railroad. It extended from New Orleans through Texas to El Paso, across New Mexico and through Tucson to Los Angeles, through most of California, including San Francisco and Sacramento. Central Pacific lines extended east across Nevada to Ogden, Utah, and reached north through Oregon to Portland. Other subsidiaries eventually included the St. Louis Southwestern Railway, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, 328 miles, the 1,331 miles Southern Pacific Railroad of Mexico, and a variety of 3-feet narrow-gauge routes. In 1929, Espee and No operated 13,848 route miles, not including Cotton Belt, whose purchase of the Golden State Route circa 1980 nearly doubled its size to 3,085 miles, bringing total SSW mileage to around 13,508 miles. By the 1980s, route mileage had dropped to 10,423 miles, mainly due to the pruning of branch lines. In 1988, the Southern Pacific was taken over by D&AMP RGW parent Rio Grande Industries. The combined railroad kept the Southern Pacific name due to its brand recognition in the railroad industry and with customers of both constituent railroads. Along with the addition of the SPCSL Corporation route from Chicago to St. Louis, the total length of the D&AMP RGW SPSSW system was 15,959 miles. By 1,996, years of financial problems had dropped Espee's mileage to 13,715 miles, and it was taken over by the Union Pacific Railroad. The Espee was the defendant in the landmark 1886 United States Supreme Court case Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad, which is often interpreted as having established certain corporate rights under the Constitution of the United States. Southern Pacific founded important hospitals in San Francisco, Tucson, and elsewhere. In the 1970s, it also founded a telecommunications network with a state-of-the-art microwave and fiber optic backbone. This evolved into Sprint, a company whose name that came from the acronym for Southern Pacific Railroad Internal Networking Telephony Timeline. Origins. One of the original ancestor railroads of Espee, the Galveston and Red River Railway, was chartered on the 11th of March 1848 by Ebenezer Allen, although the company did not become active until 1852 after a series of meetings at Chapel Hill, Texas and Houston, Texas. The original aim was to construct a railroad from Galveston Bay to a point on the Red River near a trading post known as Coffee's Station. Ground was broken in 1853. The GRR built 2 miles of track in Houston in 1855. Track laying began in earnest in 1856, and on the 1st of September 1856 GRR was renamed the Houston and Texas Central Railway. Espee acquired H&AMP TC in 1883, but it continued to operate as a subsidiary under its own management until 1927, when it was leased to another Espee-owned railroad, the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. The Buffalo Bayou, Brazos and Colorado Railway was chartered in Texas on the 11th of February 1850 by a group that included General Sidney Sherman, BBB and Amp-C was the first railroad to commence operation in Texas and the first component of Espee to commence operation. Surveying of the route alignment commenced at Harrisburg, Texas in 1851 and construction between Houston and Allerton, Texas commenced later that year. The first 20 miles of track opened in August 1853. Espee was founded in San Francisco, California in 1865 by a group of businessmen led by Timothy Phelps with the aim of building a rail connection between San Francisco and San Diego, California. The company was purchased in September 1868 by a group of businessmen known as the Big Four: Charles Crocker, Leland Stanford, Mark Hopkins, Jr. and C.P. Huntington. The Big Four had, in 1861, created the Central Pacific Railroad. CPRR was merged into Espee in 1870. June 1873, the Southern Pacific builds its first locomotive at the railroad's Sacramento shops as CP's second number 55, a 440. November 8, 1874, Southern Pacific tracks reach Bakersfield, California and work begins on the Tehachapi Loop. September 5, 1876, the first through train from San Francisco arrives in Los Angeles, California after traveling over the newly completed Tehachapi Loop. 1877, Southern Pacific tracks from Los Angeles cross the Colorado River at Yuma, Arizona. Southern Pacific purchases the Houston and Texas Central Railway. 1879, Southern Pacific engineers experiment with the first oil-fired locomotives. March 20, 1880, the first Southern Pacific train reaches Tucson, Arizona. May 11, 1880, the Muscle Slough tragedy takes place in Hanford, California. 1881, Southern Pacific gains control of the Texas and New Orleans Railroad and the Louisiana Western Railroad. May 19, 1881, Southern Pacific tracks reach El Paso, Texas, beating the rival Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway to El Paso. December 15, 1881, Southern Pacific meets the Texas and Pacific at Sierra Blanca, Texas in Hudspeth County, Texas, getting close to completing the nation's second Transcontinental Railroad. January 12, 1883, the southern section of the second Transcontinental Railroad line is completed as the Southern Pacific tracks from Los Angeles meet the Galveston, Harrisburg and San Antonio Railway at a location 3 miles west of the Pecos River near to Langtry, Texas. The sterling silver spikes were alternatively driven by James Campbell and James Converse, with the other driven by Col. Tom Pierce, the GH and Amp-C president. These spikes were thereafter quickly removed. This became the first year-round all-weather Transcontinental Railroad. Almost 10 years later, March 31, 1892, the Pecos River High Bridge was opened. This moved the line up and out of the Rio Grande Canyon and simplified the alignment. The line now extends to San Antonio and Houston along the Sunset Route. March 17, 1884, the Southern Pacific is incorporated in Kentucky. February 17, 1885, the Southern Pacific and Central Pacific are combined under a holding company named the Southern Pacific Company. April 1, 1885, the Southern Pacific takes over all operation of the Central Pacific. Effectively, the CP no longer exists as a separate company. 1886, the first refrigerator cars on the Southern Pacific enter operation. The loading of refrigerator cars with oranges, first performed at Los Angeles, California on February 14, contributed to an economic boom in the famous citrus industry of Southern California. by making deliveries of perishable fruits and vegetables to the eastern United States possible. 1886, Southern Pacific wins the landmark Supreme Court case Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad, which establishes equal rights under the law to corporations. 1893, Southern Pacific train bandits John Sontag and Chris Evans are apprehended in the Battle of Stone Corral near Visalia, California. 1898, Sunset Magazine is founded as a promotional tool of the Southern Pacific. October 1899, Southern Pacific gains control of the Houston East and West Texas Railway. 1901, Frank Norris's novel, The Octopus, A California Story, a fictional retelling of the Muscle Slough tragedy and the events leading up to it, is published. July 6, 1901, the Southern Pacific Terminal Company is chartered as an independent operating entity to provide rail service to the Southern Pacific's steamer docks in Galveston, Texas. 1901, Union Pacific Railroad acquires control of Southern Pacific. In the following years, many Espee operating procedures and equipment purchases follow patterns established by Union Pacific. 1903, Southern Pacific gains 50% control of the Pacific Electric System in Los Angeles. March 8, 1904, Espee opens the Loosen Cutoff across the Great Salt Lake, bypassing Promontory, UT for the railroad's main line. March 20, 1904, Espee's coastline is completed between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, CA. April 18, 1906, the Great 1906 San Francisco earthquake strikes, damaging the railroad's headquarters building and destroying the mansions of the now-deceased Big Four. 1906, Espee and UP jointly form the Pacific Fruit Express refrigerator car line. May 22, 1907, the Coastline Limited of the Southern Pacific Railroad is derailed west of Glendale, California. The accident causes several deaths and injuries, and its cause linked to anarchists. 1907, with Santa Fe, Southern Pacific forms Northwestern Pacific, unifying several Espee and Santa Fe-owned subsidiaries into one jointly owned railroad serving northwestern California. 1909, the Southern Pacific of Mexico, the railroad's subsidiary south of the U.S. border, is incorporated. 1913, the Supreme Court of the United States orders the Union Pacific to sell all of its stock in the Southern Pacific. December 28, 1917, the federal government takes control of American railroads in preparation for World War I. 1923, the Interstate Commerce Commission allows the Espee's control of the Central Pacific to continue, ruling that the control is in the public's interest. March 1, 1927, various Texas and Louisiana Espee subsidiaries are leased to the Espee-controlled Texas and New Orleans Railroad, including the Galveston, Harrisburg and San Antonio Railway, the Houston and Texas Central Railway, the Houston East and West Texas Railway, the San Antonio and Aransas Pass Railway, and the Southern Pacific Terminal Company. 1928, the Espee purchases the Texas Midland Railroad and leases the line to the Espee-controlled Texas and New Orleans Railroad. 1929, Santa Fe sells its interest in Northwestern Pacific to Espee. NWP becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of Espee. 1932, the Espee gains 87% control of the Cotton Belt Railroad. June 30, 1934, all Texas and Louisiana Espee subsidiaries previously leased to the Espee-controlled Texas and New Orleans Railroad, with the exception of the Southern Pacific Terminal Company, formerly merged with the T&AMP No. thus creating the largest railroad in Texas, with 3,713 miles of track. May 1939, up Espee and Santa Fe passenger trains in Los Angeles are united into a single terminal as Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal opens. 1947, the first road diesel locomotives owned solely by Espee enter operation on the Espee. 1947, Southern Pacific is reincorporated in Delaware. 1951, Southern Pacific subsidiary Southern Pacific of Mexico sold to the Mexican government. 1952, a difficult year for the Espee in California opens with the city of San Francisco train marooned for 3 days in heavy snow on Donner Pass. In July, an earthquake hits Tehachapi Pass, closing the line over Tehachapi Loop from the 21st of July to the 15th of August. 1953, the first trailer on flat car equipment enters service on the Espee. January 1957, the last standard gauge steam locomotives in regular operation on the Espee are retired. The railroad is now dieselized except for fan excursions. 1959, the last revenue steam-powered freight is operated on the system by narrow gauge number 9. 1959, Southern Pacific moved more ton-miles of freight than any other U.S. railroad. November 1, 1961, the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, which by this time encompassed all of the Espee's Texas and Louisiana holdings except for the lines of the Southern Pacific Terminal Company and Cotton Belt, is merged with the Southern Pacific. The SPTC, having been previously leased to the T&AMP No, is leased to the Espee the same day. The SPTC would formally merge with the Espee on August 31, 1962. 1965, ICC rejects Southern Pacific's bid for control of the Western Pacific. 1967, Espee opens the longest stretch of new railroad in a quarter-century as trains roll over the Palmdale Cutoff through Cajon Pass. May 1, 1971, Amtrak takes over long-distance passenger trains in the United States. The only Espee revenue passenger trains thereafter were the commutes between San Francisco and San Jose. 1972, Southern Pacific Communications began selling surplus capacity on its microwave and fiber optic telecom system to corporations for use as private lines. This service would evolve into a Sprint. 1976, Espee is awarded Dow Chemicals' first annual Rail Safety Achievement Award in recognition of the railroad's handling of Dow products in 1975. 1980, now owning a 98.34% control of the Cotton Belt, the Southern Pacific extends the Cotton Belt from St. Louis to Santa Rosa, New Mexico through acquisition of part of the former Rock Island Railroad. 1984, northern portion of subsidiary Northwestern Pacific sold to independent shortline Eureka Southern Railroad, which begins operation on November 1, 1984. The Southern Pacific Company merges into Santa Fe Industries, parent of the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway, to form Santa Fe Southern Pacific Corporation. When the Interstate Commerce Commission refuses permission for the planned merger of the railroad subsidiaries as the Southern Pacific Santa Fe Railroad, SPSF shortens its name to Santa Fe Pacific Corporation and puts the Espee Railroad up for sale while retaining the non-rail assets of the Southern Pacific Company. 1985, new coal train locomotives and rolling stock replace Espee equipment on the Peninsula commute, marking the end of Southern Pacific passenger passenger service with Espee equipment. August 9, 1988, the Interstate Commerce Commission approves the purchase of the Southern Pacific by Rio Grande Industries, the company that controlled the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. October 13, 1988, Rio Grande Industries takes control of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The merged company retains the name Southern Pacific for all railroad operations. 1989, Southern Pacific acquires 223 miles of former Alton trackage between St. Louis and Joliet from the Chicago, Missouri and Amp Western. For the first time, the Southern Pacific served the Chicago area on its own rails. March 17, 1991, the Southern Pacific changes its corporate image, replacing the century-old Roman lettering with the Rio Grande-inspired speed lettering. 1992, Northwestern Pacific is merged into Espee, ending NWP's existence as a corporate subsidiary of Espee and leaving the Cotton Belt as Espee's only remaining major railroad subsidiary. The Northwestern Pacific's south end would eventually be sold off by UP and turned into a new Northwestern Pacific. 1996, the Union Pacific Railroad finishes the acquisition that was effectively begun almost a century before with the purchase of the Southern Pacific by UP in 1901, until divestiture was ordered in 1913. Ironically, although Union Pacific was the dominant company, taking complete control of Espee, its corporate structure was merged into Southern Pacific, which on paper became the surviving company, which then changed its name to Union Pacific. The merged company retains the name Union Pacific for all railroad operations. In the tables, Espee does not include NWP, P and AMP, Senior, SD and AMP, AFP, Holton Interurban, Visalia Electric, T and AMP. No. Total for 1925 includes GH and AMP, SAR, H and AMP, TC, SAR and AMP, AP and the other roads that folded into T and AMP. No. A couple years later, SSW includes SSW of Texas. 1971 Moody's shows route mileage operated as of the 31st of December 1970 to 11,615 Espee 1565 SSW 324 NWP 136 SD and AMP A 4040 and AMP T 34 VE 30 P and AMP Senior and 10 High U. Espee operated 18,337 miles of track. Locomotive paint and appearance. Like most railroads, the Espee painted most of its steam locomotives black during the 20th century, but after 1945 Espee painted the front of the locomotive's smokebox silver, with graphite-colored sides, for visibility. As locomotives are being restored, some Pacific Type 462 locomotive boilers show signs of having been painted dark green. The softcover book, Steam Glory 2, by Kalmbach Publications has an article, Southern Pacific's Painted Ladies, which shows color photos from the 1940s and 1950s revealing that a number of Espee 60-yard engines, usually assigned to passenger terminals, were painted in various combinations with red cab roof and cab doors, pale silver smoke boxes and smoke box fronts, dark green boilers, multicolored Espee heralds on black cab, green cylinder covers and other details pointed out in color. Some other Espee steam passenger locomotives may have been painted, or at least had dark green boilers. The article indicates that these paint jobs lasted years and were not special paint for a single event. Some passenger steam locomotives bore the daylight scheme, named after the trains they haul, most of which had the word daylight in the train name. This scheme, carried on the tender, was a bright red on the top and bottom thirds, with the center third being a bright orange. The parts were separated with narrow white bands. Some of the color continued along the locomotive. The most famous daylight locomotives were the Gs4 Steam Locomotives. The most famous daylight-hauled trains were the Coast Daylight and the Sunset Limited. Well known were the Southern Pacific's unique cab-forward steam locomotives. These were two 884 locomotives set up to run in reverse, with the tender attached to the smoke box end of the locomotive. Southern Pacific had a number of snow sheds in mountain terrain, and locomotive crews nearly asphyxiated from smoke in the cab. After a number of engineers began running their engines in reverse, Southern Pacific asked Baldwin Locomotive Works to produce cab-forward designs. No other North American railroad ordered cab-forward locomotives. Early diesel locomotives were also painted black. Yard switches had diagonal orange stripes on the ends for visibility, earning this scheme the nickname of Tiger Stripe. Road freight units were black with a red band at the bottom of the car body and a silver and orange winged nose. Southern Pacific was in a large serif font in lettering gray. Rail fans call this pen scheme Black Widow, an experimental scheme. All over black with a variety of orange end and side sill treatments was called the Halloween scheme. Over 200 locomotives were painted between March 1957 and mid-1958. Most passenger units were painted originally in the daylight scheme as described above, though some were painted red on top, silver below for the Golden State between Chicago and Los Angeles. Silver cars with a narrow red band at the top were used for the Sunset Limited and other trains into Texas. In 1958, Espee standardized on a paint scheme of dark gray with a red winged nose. Rail fans dubbed this scheme Bloody Nose. Lettering was again in lettering gray. Anticipating the failed Southern Pacific Santa Fe Railroad merger in the mid-1980s, the Kodachrome paint scheme was applied to many Southern Pacific locomotives. When the Southern Pacific Santa Fe merger was denied by the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Kodachrome units were not immediately repainted, some even lasting up to the Southern Pacific send as an independent company. The Interstate Commerce Commission's decision left Southern Pacific in a decrepit state. The locomotives were not repainted immediately, although some were repainted into the Bloody Nose scheme as they were overhauled after months to years of deferred maintenance. After the 1988 purchase of Southern Pacific by Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad owner Philip Anschutz, the side lettering on repainted locomotives was changed from Espee's serif font to the Rio Grande's speed lettering style. The Rio Grande did not retain its identity, as Anschutz felt the Southern Pacific name was the more recognizable. A variation of the daylight scheme, also known as popsicles, designed by Chester Mack, was applied to Espee's Forte 70s. U-25Bs were powered with Sulzer diesel engines. Some former Espee locomotives largely retained their original Bloody Nose livery, amended with yellow patches and new numbers. Following the takeover by Union Pacific, Southern Pacific road switcher diesels often had elaborate lighting clusters front and rear, with a large red Mars light for emergency signaling, and often two pairs of sealed beam headlamps, one on top of the cabin, the other below the Mars light on the nose. snows. Starting in the 1970s, Espee had cab air conditioning on all new locomotives, and the unit is visible on the cab roof. Southern Pacific placed large snowplows on the pilots of the road switches for the heavy snowfall on Donner Pass. Many Southern Pacific road switches had a Nathan Air Chime Model P3 or P5 air horn with cords distinct to Southern Pacific locomotives in the western states. The Southern Pacific and Cotton Belt were the only buyers of the EMD's Gs4 T2 tunnel motor locomotive. This locomotive was necessary because the standard configuration EMD's D45 could not get a sufficient amount of cool air into the diesel locomotive's radiator while working Southern Pacifics through snow sheds and tunnels in the Cascades and Donner Pass. These tunnel motors were EMD's D45-2s with radiator air intakes at the locomotive car body's walkway level, rather than EMD's typical setup with fans on the locomotive's long hood roof pulling air through radiators at the top side of the locomotive's body. Inside tunnels and snow sheds, hot exhaust from lead units would accumulate near the top of the tunnel or snow shed and be drawn into the radiators of trailing EMD locomotives, leading these locomotives to shut down as the diesel prime mover overheated. The Southern Pacific also operated EMD's D40 T2s, as did the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Southern Pacific was known for L-shaped engineers' windshields, introduced by EMD on SD45 Demonstrator 4353. This design improves visibility by emitting the pillar, which in conventional designs splits the engineer's windshield into two panes. Southern Pacific selected this option on new EMD locomotive orders starting in 1967 through the early 1980s, one of the few railroads to do so, and ordered a similar windshield design from General Electric. After the wide-nose design became popular, most of Southern Pacific's locomotives kept their L-shaped windshields before being rebuilt or sold to different private railroads after its merger. Unlike other railroads whose locomotive number boards bore the locomotive number, Espee used them for the train number until 1967. The other railroad that used locomotive number boards for train numbers into the 1960s was Espee's Transcontinental partner, Union Pacific. In 2006, Union Pacific unveiled Up 1996, the sixth and final of its Heritage Series EMD's D70 Ace locomotives. Its paint scheme appears to be based on the Daylight and Black Widow schemes. Today there are still locomotives in Espee paint, including 10 AC440CWs with original Espee numbers as of January 2013. Passenger train service. Until May 1, 1971, the Southern Pacific at various times operated the following named passenger trains. Trains with names in italicized bold text still operate under Amtrak. 49er, Apache, Argonaut, Arizona Limited, Beaver, Californian, Cascade, City of San Francisco, Coast Daylight, Coast Mail, Coaster, Del Monte, Fast Mail, Golden Rocket, Golden State, Grand Canyon, Hustler, Imperial, Klamath, Lark, Oregonian, Overland, Owl, Pacific Limited, Peninsula Commute, Rogue River, Sacramento Daylight, San Francisco Challenger, San Joaquin Daylight, Senator, Shasta Daylight, Shasta Express, Shasta Limited, Shasta Limited Deluxe, Starlight, Sunbeam, Sunset Limited, Suntan Special, Tehachapi, West Coast, El Costino, El Yaqui. Locomotives used for passenger service. Steam locomotives. 280 Consolidation, 282 Mikado, 442 Atlantic, 462 Pacific, CSP 2472. 482 Mountain, 484 Golden State, General Service, CSP 4449, 4882 Cab Forward Articulated Mallet, Diesel Locomotives Alco PA, EMCE2, EMDE7, EMDE8, EMDE9 CSP 6051, EMDFP7, FMH24-66 Trainmaster, EMDGP7 SSW only, EMDGP9 CSP 5623, EMDSD7, EMDSD9 CSP 4450, GEP30CH leased from Amtrak, EMDSDP 45.